like to invite the panel up for the next part of this discussion on drug delivery. Those are certainly very exciting talks about this whole field, which we've been waiting for some time. The panel consists of three preeminent vitreoretinal specialists who all have a special interest also in drug delivery. I'd like to introduce Jay Duker first, the director of the New England Eye Center and Tufts chair, and Barry Kupperman, who also is the chair at UC Irvine and has extensive experience in drug delivery, and David Boyer, the preeminent private practice in Southern California. He's the founder and senior partner of. All of these three men have been extensively involved in clinical trials, not just drug delivery, but all of retina. And it's my pleasure to ask them some questions about drug delivery. As I mentioned, it's really become a treatment burden, not just for the patient, but for the doctor in the clinic in treating retinal diseases, especially macular degeneration. And we can't wait to have something that allows us to extend the visits. That being said, we only have drug delivery devices approved currently with mostly steroids in them. And so before we move into the new exciting stuff, I'll spend 1 minute on what we have available, and that is the long-term delivery systems for the steroids, from Ozurdex, the dexamethasone implant, to the fluocinolone implants. And I'll ask the question, I've been a little surprised that the uptake of the fluocinolone implant not being as dramatic as I initially expected for treatment of diabetes. Is that because it doesn't have a burst and we were expecting more of a bang when we put this in? Or is it something else? Who would like to take this?
I think it's multifactorial, like a lot of these things are. The history of that device is that device was built to last 3 years because it could be engineered to last 3 years. I don't think there was any market research or discussions with actual clinicians to say how long a device would you like. Second problem is, at the time, the FDA ended up requiring a 3-year study to get it approved. And the company that was getting it approved at the time, I don't think had quite prepared for that. And finally, there's some inherent bias, I think, against steroids because of the side effect profile, given the side effect profile of anti-VEGFs. So while I think very few people would use a steroid for DME as first line, I certainly am happy to use it as a second line therapy, but the 3-year implant is daunting for us.
Any other comments?
I think Jay really hit it on the head. It is a useful product. There is a concern with, I think, the bias of the marketplace against steroids in general, so the fear of that complication over time, I think, to a certain extent was a limiting effect. It is also interesting, many of us that have been involved in drug delivery, and by the way, I should mention, if all of you don't know, Bob Avery has also been very involved in drug delivery and has patents in that space. But the thought was, if you were to design it, you would want that zero-order kinetics. But we're not sure. As it turns out, some of these other products have this burst at first, and we're still questioning whether that burst is ideal to quench the disease before you go into the steady state pharmacokinetics. So that is an open question as well.
And I think, Bob, there was the carryover from the Retrocert and the high incidence of glaucoma and cataracts that were forming. So I agree with everything that's been said. I think it's become a second-line drug here. In Europe, I think they use it much more as a primary drug.
And to contrast with the Ozurdex, though, which at first was a 6-month drug, then it was a 3-month drug, and now it's pretty clear, and we just saw the data, it's really a 2.5-month drug. So it didn't really hit the sweet spot either.
What is so it did have eventual uptake because I think of its shorter delivery, and I think you're about to ask what's the sweet spot of delivery, and I think it depends on the drug and the disease state, but generically speaking, I would say you want something in the 6 to 12 month range. I think for most conditions, for most drugs, that would be the general answer. But there are other conditions, something that affects somebody very young, then you'd want it to last much longer so they're not subjected to.
That may make particular sense with steroids, which has that side effect of pressure and glaucoma and cataract more so than some of the other agents. And so we heard earlier today, Utique, they may be looking for a shorter duration, something in between the 3 years and the 3 months. And so I think that all makes sense.
I think if I could just interject too, it also depends what disease you're treating, because what's the consequence of the medicine running out? Mm-hmm. So if it's DME or RVO, having a little macular edema is not harmful. Wet macular degeneration, it's pretty clear that you want continuous therapy. And so that's, for that disease, longer acting with an overlap of a second injection would probably be the way we would do it.
Sure. Well, let's shift gears. Why is it that we still don't have a clinically approved anti-VEGF long delivery system? It's been 15 years we've been injecting like monkeys in the clinic. What is the main problem? Why we don't have one?
I can comment. I think one problem is that it's very hard to put large biologics, large molecules into a drug delivery system. You heard just now from Rivana claiming to do that, and they have some evidence. I've looked at that. As you see, my name was on that, so I'm not here to tout Rivana, but that's the whole issue. It's very difficult. Most of the other products, the companies that have developed, have not been able to achieve that goal. When you heat the protein or annealing or whatever the process is, it denatures the protein. So the cross-linking process that Rivana claims seems to do it in a way that is not injurious to the molecule. So I think that's a limiting factor, that it's very difficult to create a long-term delivery product. That being said, that's why there's the reservoir. That's why the port system is the one that's first make it to marketplace, because that's just creating a reservoir for the drug more than creating a drug delivery system internally. Sorry about that.
Dave?
No, I agree. I think that I've looked at a number of companies that have had animal work that have shown that they can deliver biologics, and none of them have come to the clinic. I think once you get into humans, the proteins break down, but Ravana's work seems very exciting, and I hope that it makes it through.
Great. Yeah, I agree. With respect to our clinical experience where we have this drop in visual acuity over 5 years, let's say, we don't, in the real clinic, end up with the same visual outcomes we had in the trials. Do you think that's due mostly to a lack of compliance or not enough injections, or do you think there are other processes going on that should be a target for therapeutic intervention, not just improve compliance with drug delivery, but also another pathway or two to attack?
Yes to all of them. It's compliance, but this is the real world. I mean, people who enroll in clinical trials are very motivated. The trial is very structured, and I think very few drugs in the real world match what they do in clinical trials. Absolutely. It doesn't mean we shouldn't strive to, but yes, some degree of undertreatment no doubt occurs. But the biggest variability is not in the drug or even the timing, it's in the patient. And what I mean by that is I think they're patients who are big VEGF makers and they need frequent injections regardless of the drug, and if you don't deliver that, they're going to lose vision. I think that other side of it, though, is in the long term, many of these patients do develop geographic atrophy, and we can't treat that right now.
I think it depends on the disease state you're treating. So if you're talking about AMD specifically, I think that the major problem that we have in the United States is undertreatment. I think that most of the studies have shown, whether you look at insurance studies from Medicare or Kaiser studies, they've all shown that we really don't treat as aggressively as we did in clinical trials. So, I believe that, some of these longer-acting drug deliveries systems that we talked about, Graybug and some of the others, Kodiak and others that may last longer than the gene therapies, may allow us to get better results in the future. I think the most exciting thing was with the latter trial, the length of time before you needed to retreat was way beyond what you really would have expected just based upon the drug. So sometimes this long-acting may be drug modifying also. So I think that's what we're looking for.
But I would also argue we don't test that hypothesis very often. There's very few of us that would treat and extend beyond 3 months, but we all have those patients we're injecting quarterly, and they'll say every visit, do I really need this shot? And the answer is, well, we're never going to probably find out because I don't want to go back to a PRN arm. But you're right. But that back to the point of there's an individual variability in VEGF release.
Though you did highlight, just to emphasize one thing you said, Jay, as well, is that this underlying, this ongoing therapy with anti-VEGF, treatment with anti-VEGF therapy is promoting the development of geographic atrophy, and that may be another limiting factor in the development of vision. It's still a source of debate and concern we have. It's not unequivocal, but again, we don't have a neuroprotectant agent. Well, that's something that we're struggling to find. And secondly, we don't know what the impact will be if there was an extended delivery anti-VEGF. Will that promote even more GA? We don't have the answer to that yet.
I'm not sure that it's promoting GA. I think that we're getting the dry AMD progressing. I think we have brought the wet AMD under control with these agents, and the dry AMD continues to grow and grow. So I'm not of the belief that anti-VEGF alone causes GA.
Well, at the very least, it allows it's certainly not making the underlying GA any better, and it's allowing the extended visual life of those eyes, and allows that, and the GA is progressing regardless of whether it's being stimulated by the anti-VEGF therapy or just the underlying disease, and that's what we don't have any treatment for yet. There's certainly a huge amount of effort going on surrounding that, but as of yet, no clear success.
It was a little concerning that in the first Genentech trials, Anchor Marina Harbor, we did see with the monthly injections CAT trial, we did see more GA in the monthly injections in the PRN ones, but that's not been shown to be such a big problem subsequently. So it's definitely controversial. And yet with the extended delivery system, one concern is that you have a constant level instead of the up and down level of injections. And do you think constant inhibition of VEGF might exacerbate any potential role of GA formation?
If it's complete inhibition, and that's the problem. We really have no way of measuring that or knowing that even with gene therapy subretinally, are we getting rid of all the VEGF and the choroid and the RPE, or
Probably
just,
not.
yeah, probably not.
So one of the advantages of our rudimentary drug delivery systems, that is the frequent, whether that's monthly or every other month or every third month anti-VEGF injections with a 30-gauge needle, is that it does allow up to a point a drug holiday. And that's actually at UC Irvine. I have a joint appointment in biomedical engineering, and we have some patents in that pulsatile therapy space. That's something that hasn't really been explored, but it may be a way around some of those issues.
And the other thing to remember, in a patient only has the disease in one eye, it's very clear if you catch it early and when it occurs in the fellow eye, they do better. And so we're going to still be reluctant to let people go for a year or two between examinations, even if we have a delivery system that would allow it in that first eye.
Absolutely. I have a question about, we'll go forward a little bit. If the delivery system from Genentech, the port delivery system works and it lasts a year, will some of these adjunctive treatments be less valuable if you can completely suppress VEGF for a year and yet we're looking at things with half-lives less than a year or durability of effect less than a year?
Well, I think that even if it is able to, let's say, do 6 months or a year, there's still going to be patients that'll have breakthroughs. It's a very individualized, problem, and I don't think we can look at a patient on day one necessarily and say, you're 3, months for the rest of your life, or you're 6 weeks or 4 weeks. We find that happy medium when we start treating the patient to see how they respond. So I think that there is going to be room for the adjunct therapies because they're treating a different pathway. And perhaps, as Barry pointed out, perhaps the atrophy may be better. Maybe we will start to treat for dry AMD simultaneously with our wet AMD treatments in the future. But we have to prove a dry AMD treatment first.
There was a wide variability in the phase 2 trial of when the implant failed the first time also. So I believe they chose 6 months because 80% of the people lasted 6 months, which still means some failed earlier. So the other interesting thing to me is if you have a patient with that refillable port who failed at 4 months, you re-inject them, are they going to fail at 4 months again? Or is it going to be a year? And are people going to be all over the place with this need for second or third fills?
And regardless of the success of a long-term delivery system, whether it's port or anything else with anti-VEGF therapy, I think we all embrace it. We know that VEGF is certainly a key player in this, but it's not the only player. I think we all value the role of polypharmacy, and we'd love to have more of an oncological approach with multi-therapy that is either additive or synergistic. We discovered that when you gave more drug, anti-VEGF, it didn't seem to help that much, if at all. So I think we're all still valuing and encouraging companies to develop new therapeutic pathways.
And I think it's also disease specific. I think that we'd all agree that if we're treating diabetes, there's a lot more room for additional, treatment of inflammation and the Tide pathways and other things. In AMD, it's a VEGF-dominated disease, and I think, that I don't know how much add-on, even the Tide pathway didn't show that much of a real improvement.
But in addition, I think, so for example, wet AMD, to use your example, there is that other component that is the neuroprotective component, the GA. So that's where still polypharmacy still has a huge role.
Which brings us back to the ability to deliver more than one drug for extended period of time in patients. That really is going to be very important in the future.
So given all the new molecules we've heard about recently and the need for more, how would you classify the most important components of a drug delivery system? I mean, there are many components. The duration, is it in office or is it in the surgical suite? You know, the efficacy, is it removable or, you know, reversible? What components of the perfect, if you're making the perfect drug delivery device, what is that in your mind for different diseases, I guess, because
Yeah,
they're
well,
different.
each disease is obviously different. I think efficacy trumps everything. I think, you know, if you have you have a gold standard now, and unfortunately the bar is very high. I mean, it's extremely high to, you know, to beat anti-VEGF given every 2 months with aflibercept or monthly or however you administer it. So I think that how much vision people would be willing to leave on the table basically for a chronic release, I don't know, but you know, I don't think people want to leave a line on of vision. They might leave 2 letters, 3 letters. So I really think it really depends on the disease entity, and also I think that we're not to the point. I think safety would be my next, you know, step. It has to be safe, and you have to have something that's easy. I talk to patients about surgery, you know, in this. And they're saying, I'll take my injections. You know, it's really interesting. I mean, I say, well, you may not need an injection for 6 months. It's not that bad, doc. I don't want to go to the surgery.
Different patient population, though. The diabetics who are younger, they might offer something like that. But safety, you did put it second, David, and I'm not sure I disagree, except for, remember, intravitreal injection is really safe, right. And that bar is really high too. And so for the refillable port, if I'm not wrong, the incidence of endophthalmitis in the phase 2 trial was 1.8%. I'm not sure if that's repeated in the phase 3 that the FDA would accept that. That may be too high. So that we take the safety and the efficacy now with a 30-gauge needle and anti-VEGF for granted. So it can't be worse. Anything new can't be worse.
Go ahead, Barry.
Go ahead.
You know, I agree. I mean, the safety and the efficacy, especially in AMD, of these anti-VEGF injections is so high. I'm not sure that the FDA would stop. I think that the clinician and the patient may stop it. I think that if you can show efficacy and it's reasonable, if you go back, you know, there was a high incidence of infection, the macugen, and that got through, though it was a different time and there was nothing else available. So I think that it's going to be driven by safety, but I think efficacy and safety, you could rotate those two.
And as part of that, the efficacy compound, or component rather, is the biologic variability. It's already been addressed by Jay, I believe. But again, breakthrough is a concern, and we're going to see no matter what. Back in the day, the one drug delivery system that wasn't mentioned was the original one, the Vitrasur for the Ganscycler implant for CMV retinitis that a lot of us were involved in. And those were tested. They were made by hand, tested, and they're within 10% to last 8 months, and sometimes the patients would reactivate after 3 months, and sometimes if they live, because sadly those were individuals that were in their last year of life, but they would last indefinitely or much longer, months longer. So there's a huge amount of biologic variability in each eye.
You know, I think that one thing that is coming about that may change somewhat how we treat and make these long-acting delivery systems much more appealing is the home OCT. If that really can show us fluid that's left on table and you pick it up early if the patient's, you know, treating, if we're able to do that, that would be helpful.
Maybe, but I'm not sure I want my patient to keep getting fluid over and over.
No,
So maybe. But Barry's point is a good one for those who are developing these long-acting drugs. I think we care much more, as I say, on the front end, what time to failure versus the longevity. Whether it's a 6-month or a 9-month or a 1-year implant makes less difference than it reliably lasts 2 months or 3 months. Nobody fails before that. Because I'd like to put one in and be able to say to the patient, don't come back for 3 months. You're going to be fine.
Is there a minimum time that is going to be commercially viable in your practice for different diseases?
We don't have that yet.
Oh,
I mean,
just wondering.
even with EYLEA, we have EYLEA patients that have to be injected monthly. I suspect with brolucizumab, it's going to be the same way. So if someone had an anti-VEGF release system that reliably lasted 2 months in 99% of patients, that even if it only lasted 4 months, it'd be a great innovation.
I mean, that is a key point. We have a good system in place. It's been highlighted. It was mentioned earlier in the prior session about the paradigm, the algorithm we all have developed jointly as a community and how managing this large volume of patients. But we're seeing them at a time, we're giving them safe injections of a safe drug, and seeing them and giving the injections on time and minimizing harm. So that's a key element to anybody developing a new product and a new system, whether it's a drug delivery system or a new compound.
One last question, because our time is running short. You're all clinicians, not just researchers, but how do you think the practice of retina will react to these long-term delivery systems if they are very successful and our practice changes of our injection lanes that Tom was mentioning that we've built out? Do you think there'll be some resistance, or will it be just like we did with injections over laser, just jump on the bandwagon?
I think it's going to be variable. I think there'll be some patient biases. There'll be some doctor biases. If it is clearly more effective, we'll not be able to argue with that. If there's a gray zone of efficacy and or safety, by the way, I forgot to mention on the safety score, don't forget when you're comparing to the port delivery system, you have to do the risk of endophthalmitis from cumulative series of injections compared to the less frequent risk of injection to the port system. But yes, if it's more safe or more effective, we're going to be defenseless at arguing against it. That would carry the day.
No, I think there's going to be a slow uptake in the beginning, but I think that if we find that the safety is there and the efficacy is there, people are going to switch. We're very resilient. We'll find that we can store different things in those rooms if we need to. But
well, on that note, I think we'll end this session. But thank you very much for your excellent comments. Appreciate your attention.